This one goes out to the best operating system to have ever existed. Linux. Linux, ever free. Whose source code I'm allowed to see. Linux, understand. I'm never gonna use Windows again. Mint to on Java, we dirty it. Next void, we had Fedora fast. It's the best. Oh, Microsoft and Apple, even Google too. 1,000 cloud subscriptions couldn't make me hate you. Linux, when I gotta compute, I'll summon you. Oh, up next gen too much Kelly KDE plasma. It's cinnamon, you know me fast. It's the best. Oh, Linux, Linux.
Hey guys, I did it. I finally did it. I finally became someone who can confidently say,
punch me in the face and stuff me in a locker, I use Linux!
And today I'm going to talk to you about how my experience with Linux has been. Also note that this video does depend on some very basic knowledge. I do not expect you to have used Linux, but I do expect you to have some basic understanding of the sentence, Linux is a free and source community-made operating system that runs on almost anything you throw at it. I also expect you to know about some of the things that stop people from switching to Linux. Now, before I start actually reviewing Linux Mint, as the title of the video says, I would like to start by mentioning my past experience with Linux. I want to note that, as self-absorbed as it sounds, I am not your average user at all. And I mention this for the sole reason that I want to, make this video for other people who are trying to get into Linux. First of all, I am a programmer. I use the command line a lot because I am a programmer. I tinker with many things that most people wouldn't because I am a programmer. So even though this is my very first experience, meaningful experience using Linux, I do want to note my history with computers, generally, before we begin. 2. Before this point, I've only ever used Windows 7, 10, 11, and macOS 10.15. And 3. I have had a little bit of experience with Linux itself before this, in the form of Windows Subsystem for Linux. This allowed me to be very familiar with the command line before I ever dealt with the actual thing. You might ask, why do I care so much about the command line? Well, it's just really scary. Most people tend to avoid the command line at all costs, and Linux has a lot to do with the command line. So, surprise, surprise, they're going to avoid Linux because that means avoiding the command line. The point I'm trying to make here is that I am smarter than everyone else in this room, and that I cannot empathize with any of your struggles. It's a little thing called the curse of knowledge. We can now finally get to the meat of this video, and we'll start with the first thing. What Linux distro I used, and what those things even are. Windows and macOS come in one package. Windows is Windows, macOS is macOS. There is no deviation. You can expect every edition of both operating systems to function almost identically no matter what device you're using. Linux is not like that. Linux is not one, it is many. This is because Linux is open source, which, for our purposes, means that anyone can come in and modify it or copy it as they so please. This gives the entirety of the Linux ecosystem a very, very interesting timeline. Now, take this and extrapolate it to the entirety of Linux. Desktop environments, app formats. Yes, it is a lot. For better or for worse, you have a lot of choice. For the end user, this mostly comes down to what distro you use. For an oversimplification, distros can be thought as different variants of Linux. Different application support, themes, bundled apps, utilities, performance, how easy it is to use, and the desktop environment. According to DistroWatch, the most popular among us is Linux Mint, a distro known for its ease of use, ease of setup, and great compatibility, both in terms of what apps you can use and what devices you can run Linux Mint on. I decided to choose Linux Mint for its ease of use, ease of setup, great compatibility, both in terms of what apps you can use and what devices you can run it on. There are multiple desktop environments available for Linux Mint. I personally chose Agggghhhh, mainly because my research showed that Mate didn't have as many features and Cinnamon was ridiculously buggy. Too long getting watched, I am using Linux Mint plus Agggghhhh. But wait, what about my hardware? I am using a refurbished ThinkPad craptop, which according to its Windows 11 health check application is from 2018. It's got an Intel HD Graphics 4600, 400GB of storage, a dual-core 2GHz processor, a 1366x768 monitor, and was preloaded with Windows 8 Pro, which was updated to Windows 10 sometime before I got it. I got this thing for COVID-19, so sometime around 2020. It may be weak, but this really didn't matter to me. My parents bought this for the express purpose of running video calls for my, at the time, newly online schooling. That said, I had wanted a personal computer for years, so when I got this, I thought to myself, it's a computer that only I can use and not Chrome OS. Sure, it may as well. So I took it as my own. That's right, the computer I'm using Linux Mint on is my very first personal computer, and my very first personal computer is a computer I'm using right now that you keep seeing appear in my videos, that I read this script on. The computer that I am reading the script off of right now is running on Linux Mint. Anyways, all of this is relevant for one main reason. My hardware is weak enough such that I can tell when the OS is bloated, but my hardware is also far too weak to handle anything heavy, like heavy-duty video games or Blender. As such, I cannot speak on the quality of those sorts of applications. Now, with all of this in mind, how is Linux? As I said before, I'm a programmer. I am tech-savvy, so I've managed to pick up on a lot of things fairly quickly. That said, I did find some things difficult. Let me give you a few examples.
On Windows, shortcuts to files, folders, and desktop shortcuts for applications are all the same thing. Right-click your item, select Create Shortcut, set the icon in Properties, and name the shortcut with its file name. On Linux Mint, these shortcuts are totally different. If you want a regular shortcut to a file or folder, you want a symbolic link. If you want a shortcut on the desktop, you instead need to open the desktop's context menu and use the desktop shortcut maker on there. They're even called .desktop files.
Here's the thing though, none of this is as difficult as it is new. And that right there is honestly the thing that most people forget when adapting to Linux. It's not Windows. All the specific little details and tricks and shortcuts and intricacies that are part of Windows aren't part of Linux because Linux isn't Windows. It is a different operating system. There is new stuff. There is different stuff. But otherwise, this is pretty fine, actually. It's obviously a lot of stuff to get used to, but it's nothing you can't solve with a little bit of time and a little bit more effort. And honestly, that's it. I mean, what more can I say? A computer's a computer. If you like to use open source software, almost all of your stuff will already be Linux compatible. 40% of my headaches around Linux Mint have been with moving my things, but that has less to do with Linux and more to do with the fact that I'm moving to a new operating system in general. The other 60% of my headaches have been with adapting to Linux, because, again, this is not Windows. Things are different. Alright, Linux is different. We get it. But why is it different? There is a lot, obviously, but for the average user, I think the biggest change would have to be how you install applications. On Windows, most people get apps from two places, the Microsoft Store or an executable you download off the internet. That is to say, either Microsoft themselves give it to you, or you download it straight from the guys who made it. In this regard, Linux is completely different. Due to its decentralized nature, the distribution and obtaining of apps has completely changed. Apps are called packages now, since packages can either be an application, a library which you need for an application to function, or some other millionth thing I'm not aware of. You know how you have different app formats for Windows, Mac, iOS, Android? Well, Linux is like that, but instead of having a different app format that just says application for Linux, it is now application for a specific distro of Linux. There is a different app format for the Debian distro. a different app format for the Arch distro, a different app format for Manjaro, Ubuntu, Mint, everything, really. Every distro has its own unique app format. Also, packages are installed, the same way you would with a .msi file on Windows or a .dmg file for macOS. That said, applications can be a portable single executable file, like a .exe for Windows. That said, they again must be formatted to be unique to each Linux distro, but we'll get there soon, don't worry. But to install a package, you need a package manager. Package managers manage packages. When you need to install a package with an installer you've downloaded, they'll be there. When you need to remove a package you've already installed, they'll be there. Package managers are, like the packages they manager, distro-specific. Debian and its children use apt, Arch and its children use pacman, Fedora and its children use DNF, and so on and so forth. But they also have another duty, to act as app stores. That's right, your package manager also downloads packages from the internet. With this, they have the power to check for updates and allow you to quickly update them while you're at it. Because this is Linux, people can also host their own package manager stores, which you can actually add to your sources list. The sources list is literally just a list of possible places you can download your packages from. It really doesn't get simpler than that. Some packages are not hosted on the default store, so it's nice to be able to add extra packages as you please. When you make a program for Windows, you do a lot of work to make it run on Windows, and nothing else. If you want it to run on Mac, you have to do a lot of work to make it run on Mac OS. At which point your program will run on Windows and Mac and nothing else. When you're making a program for Linux, it only gets worse. Remember how I said that packages, and by proxy applications, are distro-specific? Well, that is now a massive problem. You have to port your application to Debian, Ubuntu, Mint, Fedora, Velux, Manjaro, Kashi, Arch, Fedora, and so many more. Oh right, desktop environments. That's right, you also need to port it to GNOME, LXQT, Mate, Xfce, KDE Plasma, plus the differences between Wayland and
XC11.
and so much goddamn more. Oh right, not to mention backwards compatibility! GNOME alone breaks so many programs when they update. You have to constantly update your program to deal with that, which not only involves making the actual update, but also figuring out what changed in the first place. It's such a massive time sink. It sucks! Luckily, the community knows this sucks, and have devised ways to fix it. Introducing Flatpak and App Images. Both of these are standards designed such that developers do not have to port, and port all of their applications over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
They both have the same end goal, making cross-distro apps easier, but they have a few key differences. App images are portable, but distro support still varies between apps due to the libraries needed for the app. Also, backwards compatibility is not guaranteed, and if the app uses a lot of distro-specific dependencies, app images can get quite large. Flatpaks are installed, but using them means first installing the Flatpak runtime, which some people might not be able to do. Flatpaks are also quite large, though they are not as large as app images due to not storing everything multiple times, and also have well-baked and, according to the devs, guaranteed backwards compatibility. The only downside is that, according to people online, they're somewhat slower. As someone on a crap top, I can say with certainty that they are totally wrong. What the hell are you talking about?
As for which one to use, I think your best way to choose is to simply ask, do you want it installed or portable? What do I mean? Well, installing Flatpaks on Mint means that they show up in the Start menu, or whatever Xfce calls it, in search results, with their own icons and the ability to make desktop shortcuts. App images don't do that. They are a single executable with no icons or search results or further integration to their name. They're not but a single file, and if I want to do anything with them, I have to do it manually. Also, are you willing to install the Flatpak runtime? Because if you're not, then you don't get to use Flatpaks at all, and you're forced to stick with app images. Also note that some apps offer both distro-agnostic Flatpaks and app images, or/and distro-specific packages. However, the distro-specific packages are usually either barely updated or completely abandoned in favor of their Flatpak or app image variants. In cases like these, you should use the distro-agnostic Flatpak or app images because that's the one they're still updating. if the distro-specific package is being supported, like with Steam, which supports Flatpak, Arch, Debian, and, all of their children, you should probably install the native version. This is because most developers only ever make native and agnostic versions if the agnostic version is broken on some specific distro, in which case they're offering the native version to sidestep those problems. But enough with the explanation, exposition, glazing, and advice. What issues have I encountered? I'll start with the issues I've had during my initial days on Linux Mint. I also want to reiterate that I was using the Xfce desktop environment, which is very, very, very important for this section in particular.
First of all, the default font size is, for my monitor, huge! Too huge! I had so much less space on my screen than I did on Windows. That said, you can turn it down really easily, you'll be fine. Second of all, customizing your lock screen using the built-in settings app and the settings that show up for the user without turning on advanced mode is dangerous for some reason. I'm not kidding, I was almost locked out of my PC because the screen was totally black.
I was forced to go into Grub and do some weird thing to fix it, though I do not recall what that was.
Third of all, the text beneath the desktop icons do not have a shadow. This makes them extremely hard to read.
Though you are able to change it, you have to dig into the configuration files of GTK and deal with CSS. Don't know what those words mean? Yeah, that's the point. It's ridiculously complicated and so much effort just to find what I even have to change in the first place. They either need to add that text shadow by default or put it in the settings. Once I was done with those, there were still more problems to be had. First up comes full screen applications. Full screen is really inconsistent and buggy. The main reason for this is that full screen does not seem to be standardized, which means that developers have to implement it themselves and tend to implement it very badly.
A perfect example of this is with Proton, a compatibility layer for Windows games to run on Linux and Chromebooks for some reason, versus Minecraft. Proton's full screen is really good. It does exactly what you expect it to, full screening when enabled and leaving full screen when you Alt-Tab out of it. However, leaving full screen means putting it in a window that, when clicked, full screens again, and is also constantly trying to be the topmost window. You have to go Alt-Tab out of the full screen window, then Alt-Tab again, and then click on whatever other software you are trying to use.
It is somewhat annoying, but easy to adjust to. That said, I would prefer if they tried to mimic Windows by minimizing the game when you leave the full screen application.
Minecraft, on the other hand, is broken. Just completely broken. It full screens, yes, but if I Alt-Tab out of it, I can't go back in. The game just stops receiving input. I can't do anything. I have to restart the game to keep playing.
Now, there is a mod that supposedly fixes this called Cubes Without Borders, but really? I had to modify the biggest game in the world, the game that is still receiving updates, on the most used Linux distro in the world, according to DistroWatch, for this to work? That's pathetic! Anyways, my point is, full screen is hella jank. There is also the problem of Wayland versus X11. For simplicity's sake, Wayland and X11 are two different pieces of software that basically control your desktop, like the graphical interface, the thing you see on your screen. That's their job. Wayland seems to be the new trend, but it doesn't have a lot of the essential features that people like from X11. And X11 is really useful and battle-tested, but its codebase is old and bad. And the developers have been forced to rewrite half the codebase because they can no longer maintain it normally. Not good. The result of this is that when you're making an application, you need to support both X11 desktops and Wayland desktops. Now, yes, there is a compatibility layer for Wayland that allows you to run X11 apps on Wayland, which in turn means that a dev could, for instance, only make X11 applications. But that compatibility layer is not good enough. So generally, when you're developing an application, you have to build for X11 and Wayland. That's two things, which is really bad. Also, remember Proton, the compatibility layer that allows you to play Windows games on Linux? Well, Proton isn't perfect. Now, don't get me wrong, Proton is awesome and it has amazing compatibility with Windows games. It also has better performance than running it natively on Windows, because Windows is that bad. Proton is good enough, that 90% of games are fully compatible, and wondering if a game will work with Proton has gone from asking if it is actually compatible with Proton, and has turned into, did the developers go out of their way to block Proton? And that right there is Proton's issue. A lot of games, namely online ones like Roblox and Fortnite, have gone out of their way to stop you from playing on Linux. So, if you're one of the firm believers that likes Roblox, but you really want Linux, then you have to either A, play on your phone, B, use an Android emulator, C, stick to Windows, D, make a virtual machine with Windows, E, play on console, or F, end your life. But what does it do right? Linux is completely free. It costs 0 of any currency on Earth to download and install, and is fully open. You are not beholden to the whims of a company like,
Soft and Apple, even Google too.
When I want to share a macOS application, I don't have to pay for an Xcode subscription. When I want to compile a Qt application for Windows, I don't have to install 10 gigabytes of Visual Studio. If I want to move the taskbar to the left of the screen, I don't need to install a third-party application with 300 broken buggy hooks that completely just shatter with every single Windows update. And speaking of updates, I'm not going to be forced to install an update that nukes my hard drive! I don't have to deal with ads. I don't need Candy Crush pre-installed on my system. I don't need deep loading scripts just to make my system good and fast and usable. I don't need to open another browser every single time I press the Windows key. This is why Linux is the best. Because Windows is slow, buggy, and filled with advertisements and forced OneDrive integration. And sure, Mac doesn't have any of those problems, but it does have the problem of nobody making applications for it, because it is basically actively hostile to developers. Nobody makes applications for Mac because doing so sucks, and those that do have to deal with the fact that Mac will probably move to yet another new CPU architecture, and they will yet again break compatibility for old applications, which will force the developer to yet again, for the third time now, port their application. Again, port and port and port and port and port their application over and over and over again just to make sure it works on the latest version of macOS. Which is, funnily enough, a problem Windows doesn't have. At all. Or Linux. So yeah, Windows sucks because it's slow and bloated, and Mac sucks because it goes out of its way to actively screw over developers, which in turn means that nobody makes apps for Mac. Which, by process of elimination, means that Linux is the best. So, how are my overall impressions? I think it's pretty good. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot that needs improvement, mainly due to the fragmentation of like the 500 bajillion Linux distros. Seriously, think about it for a minute. Most of my ramblings surrounding apps being buggy or developers having to port everything over and over and over again is all just a symptom of the fact that Linux has a lot of choice. And that is both a good thing and a bad thing. On one hand, it means that users get to use their PCs in any way they like, perfectly flexible to fit whatever needs they may have. On the other hand, it means that developers are locked into a constant battle of trying to support every distro, which results in heavier, buggier software for everyone. Now, things like Flatpaks and app images do definitely make this a lot better, but it's still not as good as it could be. Both of those have a lot of issues, and I do think we could do better if we tried. That aside, Linux is pretty awesome. You have amazing software support because Valve is a company comprised exclusively of Sigmas. You have full control over literally everything, which is delicious for nerds like me, and it is faster than Windows will ever be, which is good for, I'm not even gonna say like weak hardware, like literally no matter what PC you're on, it's so much faster. It will always be so much faster that the trade-off is worth it, even if just for speed. Going forward, I plan to move my main PC to Debian with KDE Plasma. I'm just waiting till I get a new PC because transferring all my stuff last time took 8 full hours. I don't want to go through that again. Not unless I absolutely have to. But next computer, I totally will. As for whether or not you should get it, that's your choice to make. Bye for now.